Today's episode of Burnt Out is brought to you by Code Green, keeping a first responder's well-being our priority. Turning Point Madison County, a 24/7 call helpline that assists people in life-altering situations with a primary focus on addictions and mental illnesses. And by Bridges of Hope, accredited care for substance use disorders. For more information on our sponsors, please visit burntoutpodcast.org.
Engine 1 out, World Trade Center, 1060. Send every available ambulance, everything you got to World Trade Center now.
10-4, 10-6, been transmitted.
Welcome to Burnt Out. The Burnt Out podcast shares stories of firefighters, emergency medical personnel, and other first responders around the world to create a pathway to save lives. The stories you will hear are real and may be disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. And now I'd like to introduce you to your host to Burnout, a 33-year retired veteran of the fire department, Skip O.
All right, Sean, thank you for that introduction. I'd like to welcome everybody to Burnout Podcast. We are here to help first responders, not only telling their story, but we have professionals here today that work with different organizations that help with mental health. Today we have Kelsey Aaron to the show. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Skip, for having us.
Well, I really appreciate what you do. Kelsey, could you give us a little background about your life leading up to where you're at today? Just a little snippet, and then we'll go into some other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently serve as the Indiana chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's Executive Director. Prior to my staff role with AFSP, I was a volunteer with AFSP. And we had lost our dad by suicide in 2001. So in about 2 weeks, it'll be the 21st anniversary of his passing. And so through our connection with other suicide loss survivors and getting connected with evidence-based resources, my family decided to volunteer to try and help other families who've been impacted by suicide directly and just get connected with other families and Hoosiers that are passionate about mental health as well.
Well, cool. Could you tell us a little bit about this cool-looking guy you're married to?
Yes, I just got married in December, so we have our 1-year anniversary in about a month from today, actually. My husband, Willie, so he's been awesome too. He's a nice champion, and unfortunately for him, he's our number one volunteer because I make him help me all the time.
Well, I tell you, I really like Willie, and he's a good support system for you, and he's a very positive person. Could you tell us, I like your story, how did you hear about American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, AFSP? When's the first time you heard about it?
So we lost our dad to suicide in November of 2001, and we talked about our dad. He struggled with addiction, and we always had addiction framed as a mental health disorder and like a disease in our family, but we never talked about suicide. And so we went about 13 years without getting connected to other suicide loss survivors. And it was a rainy March day in 2016. I was working out of a Starbucks remotely, trying to finish up some work for a client. And I heard a lady at the door. She said the word suicide, and that was the first time that I had ever heard anyone say it without whispering. And so I took out my headphones and kind of was listening to her conversation, and I ended up listening to her for almost 2 hours. I found out that she was actually meeting with a local high school principal where they had just had a suicide at the school, and so she was connecting with him to get him resources. And I had never heard the word suicide and prevention together. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that there were other families to the magnitude that there are that have been impacted by suicide. And it was just more so because we learned very young that it made people uncomfortable to talk about suicide, and so we just didn't do it. And now it's the exact opposite. So I thrive in people's discomfort. But yeah, that's one of the days that rainy March day was one of those days where you can pinpoint and say, like, that was a life-changing moment. And I listened to the lady's conversation. I figured out who she was, like a true millennial creeper. And I found her email online, and I was sitting just like a table away from them, but I was too scared to say anything to her in person. And so I emailed her, and she finished her meeting and left. And I didn't know if I would ever hear from her again. But that night she emailed me back, and the rest is history. So now she's my boss.
That's all. That's an awesome story. So one time on a rainy day in March, you met somebody that changed your life.
And I think it's a beautiful lesson that she's taught me that I tried to carry through our journey, is to not be quiet or have conversations in quiet spaces. Obviously, I don't want anyone to be uncomfortable when we're discussing. If it's a private conversation, it's completely fine if I want to talk to another suicide loss survivor in a more closed setting. But Skip, you and I, when we have meetings, we make sure that we're in open public spaces when we're talking about FDIC, when we're talking about worldwide peer support, when we're talking about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or any of the community partners that we work with. We don't, a lot of times, even if it could be a phone call, we try to meet in person so that we can probably, or hope to do the same thing for others that we've had experience with, and hearing things out in public too.
Sure. I've had several times, just like yourself. I'll be talking to somebody and I didn't know I'm really talking to the person a couple tables over.
Yep.
And they ask questions, or they see your shirt that we wear, the shirt that says hope.
Yep.
Or, whatever shirt that we got on, they ask about it and stuff. And I tell you what, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, we're in Indiana. How many chapters around the United States are there, Kelsey?
I think we just hit 74 chapters, with Puerto Rico being the most recent one. So we have at least one chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in every state. And then some of the larger states have multiple chapters. But for anyone that's listening that is in a different state, or you might have family in a different state, everyone has the ability to get connected with their chapter and start advocating and volunteering at whatever capacity you're able to.
Sure. And you can go to afsp.org / and whatever your state is, or go to afsp.org, and that'll lead you to your state. There, you can go in there and get your statistics of your state and different programs that's going on. Kelsey, could you tell us about some of the programs that American Foundation of Suicide Prevention sponsors, and for schools, for first responders, or for any other organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back to, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention started in the mid-'80s as a research organization. So that's at the foundation of everything we do, even as we have expanded. So research is at the core of what we do. We're the largest private funder of suicide prevention research. And from that research stems literature and resources and programs that we're able to disseminate throughout the community, which is key. We know that the literature that we're putting out, and the support resources and the community partners that we have all been vetted and evaluated prior to giving them to the community, which I think it's important, especially when we're talking about trying to debunk a lot of myths and unlearning some things that we know about mental health and mental illness and suicide, as we try to really make our community smart about mental health. So from that research, we're able to do really neat, like, volunteer 101s and get people activated so that they can find what they're most passionate about. Our programs stem all the way for younger elementary students. So those are more focused around resilience and talking about your mental health. It's not necessarily suicide specific, all the way up to we have programs for senior citizens. and everything in between. So we've got stuff for middle schoolers, high schoolers, college age, general community public. We've got some stuff that's specific for first responders, so police, EMT, fire. We've got some stuff for firearm owners, Spanish-speaking population, and all sorts of things. So we really try to make sure we reach as much of our demographic as possible, because we know everyone has been impacted by suicide, whether it's been through a close family member, they themselves are potentially having thoughts or caring for someone. It could have been a colleague or a friend of a friend, but in some way we know someone, whether it's close or distant. And so just making sure people know what resources are available to them and what community support is available for them locally is key.
It's so important to us as first responders, whether you're fire, police, military, or emergency room staff. You go on these calls and you have that sad situation where somebody died by suicide, and then you got the family hysterical, looking for answers, breaking down. And we as first responders, we got a job to do, but also we're human beings. And we what can we do for this family? And for me personally, AFSP has helped me and families that I've been involved where I can connect to support groups that some states run or cities run for AFSP. It works good for the families for that afterwards thing. And then also for the families out where they could get involved as a volunteer to help. The pain might still be there, but as time, it'll help heal the pain a little bit to show you how to survive. But one thing I've learned with being in the worldwide peer support is a lot of first responders, we don't let go of that stuff. And we kind of go home, whether it's substance abuse or stay on our own, and we grab a bottle, we put stuff up our nose and our veins, or whatever to numb that feeling. I'm just grateful that we have an outlet like AFSP to champion our first responders. They do everybody, but also champion our first responders to see, break that stigma and get our ego out of the way and say, hey, we're here. And Kelsey, I really applaud you and Lisa and everybody for being those champions for us.
No, we couldn't do this work without our volunteers. And when we're thinking about our first responders, my little brother is a police officer and his girlfriend is a firefighter. And so it's beyond an essential thing in terms of what I know from AFSP that needs to happen. It's also, I see it directly in my personal life, what is brought home. My brother lived with us for 2 years while he was saving up to buy a house. And so he would come into our room afterwards and talk about his day. And when his girlfriend would come over for dinner, she'd share some stuff with us too. And it's a lot. You guys are first on the scene for everyone's worst time. You're not calling police or fire to hang out. My grandma might be, because she might be lonely, but for the most part, people aren't calling because something good is happening. And so it's whether these resources are for you as that first responder who is supporting these families or these individuals, or it's for your family. It's just essential to know you're in the mode of how to put out this fire or how to support this individual in crisis. You aren't expected to know every single community resource that's available to these people, or this might be your first suicide attempt that you've been on the run for. It might be the first suicide death. Like, what do you do? And what do you say? And that's kind of where we can come in and learn from you. We want it to be a collaborative partnership. I don't know what it's like to be the first on the scene for something like that. And you don't want me to be that person. But what I can do is provide resources to you. So for you to have them in your rig or in your car to leave for the family for whenever they're ready for them, or for you to have to take to the firehouse or to the station to be able to have for someone to pick up. Somebody might not ask directly for anything, but if it's sitting on the table, they'll look at it or skim it or something like that. So our hope is that we can really figure out how to best support and collaborate with one another so that we're supporting all of you and all of the incredible, amazing work that you're doing to make your lives just a little lighter, if that makes sense. You aren't expected to have all of the answers. And that's where the community partnerships come in, to where we can support one another and hear each other out. And on those terrible days, Skip and I call each other and like, you'll never believe what happened. And then he'll say the same thing to me. And it's just nice to know that we have a true friendship in this work, because it can be hard and heavy.
For me personally, and this for anybody that's out there, I was on the board for American Foundation of Suicide Prevention with Kelsey for a little while, the old guy, and then also did some other things. Been sober for, back then I think it was 18 years. I was clean and sober, sponsoring people. But I woke up one morning and I didn't want to be in this world again, and I was afraid to reach out or say something to some people. And then I was getting the plan together and trying to get to kill myself. And one thing I was going to leave behind was this worldwide peer support thing when we were set up at FDIC in 2019. But finally, it worked itself out where our peer support seen a change in me because of some of the classes he's been through. And he approached me. And then that's when I went and got help at the Center of Excellence in Maryland for firefighters. And the funny thing is, when I got okay to get help, I was at the State House on Advocacy Day, and they called me, said, "You've been okayed." And I'm like, "Doc," going it, and because I wanted to be a little bit alive than dead. And then I remember walking over to Brandon Dryman, and I said, "Brandon," and Brandon's captain of the peer support for Indianapolis Fire, and he teaches peer-to-peer and resiliency all over the United States for IAFF. And I said, "Brandon, I got something embarrassing." I said, "Man, I got to go to treatment." They said I had PTSD and some other things. And Brandon took me under his wing. He drove me 10 hours to that treatment center. While I was at treatment, Kelsey and I think it was Tammy we were talking. They supported me while I was in treatment, let me guide where I wanted to stay on the board, and let me maneuver around my what I had to work on first. But Kelsey, you know how grateful I am for you in this organization, and I know a lot of other people that you've helped that people don't know about. Sometimes it's a thankless job. It wears you out, but for me and the people that I know, we really appreciate AFSP and here in Indiana, and I know all the rest of the United States is doing well. But I just want to thank you again for all that.
No, I love you, Skip. And I mean, the feeling is mutual. I always said, I don't know how Skip knows, but it's usually on like the worst days ever where his name would pop up and I'm like, oh God. And then he'd answer and I'm like, that's exactly what I needed. He knew that I wasn't okay. I struggle too with my mental health. That's one of the beautiful gifts. In addition to my dad's dark humor, I also got some of the mental illness and stuff from him too. But no, your friendship is something that I value deeply. And you remind me often that we're not meant to do this life alone. And so when those dark thoughts do come, that is important that we call each other out. I might not be able to vocalize and say like, I need help, or this is what I'm thinking, but somehow you always know when to call and say, hey, how are you doing? I'm checking in. And I'm like, God, how do you know? But all that to be said, AFSP and our volunteers have provided me a life that I never thought that I would have. I get to actively love my dad through this work every single day. I heard someone in one of our conferences say, the love that you have for, it never goes away. That's that guilt and grief that's bottled up. And for so long, I was 11 when he died, and he struggled with addiction most of my life. He got sober when I was in second grade, and he was sober until the day he died. So we had 3 years where he was clean and sober. But it wasn't easy at all. But because of the volunteers, I get to actively love my dad. I get to see my almost 84-year-old grandma unburden herself from the guilt and grief that she has, that I only knew her to be that way. And now she's so much lighter. And I get to see my little brother thrive and do things that he wants to do. just because of the support that we've been able to get from peers. And not that there isn't power in other treatments and in therapy and whatever venue people need to do to get help. I've definitely had a combination of all of that, but the peer support and that has been invaluable, and our lives would be drastically different if it weren't for volunteers like Skip and Brandon and all of those guys who, they're sweet and lovely and direct when they need to be, and it's exactly what I needed, whether I wanted it or not.
Well, I tell you, that's, I love it. When the pain, I love when somebody told me this a long time ago. It says, when the pain of where you're at gets greater than the fear of where you're going, then you'll make a change. And I think with us as first responders or anybody, when you're hurting, you don't know how to reach out, you're afraid, you're embarrassed, whether it's somebody, man, walk through that door. I can tell you from experience, it was hard for me. It was embarrassing for me. But once I did that, the freedom that came out of that letting go was more, I'm just full of gratitude today, right now at this moment. You just don't know who you're leaving behind because that depression cloaks over you. And you think it's all you just nobody understands. And it's not that they don't love the people they're leaving. It's that they don't know how to love themselves. And that's the problem. It's to love yourself. But with a first responder, and not that we're all human beings, but the stuff that we see sometimes, it desensitizes us from the love, from seeing that bright light, because we're seeing people at their worst. We're seeing stuff people should not see. And to know that
over and over and over. Yeah.
It's like a flashcard, isn't it? To know AFSPs out there and other counselors and therapists and treatments out there for everybody, not just first responders. There's an answer for everybody if you want it. You just got to walk through the door. Kind of squirrel caging a little bit, jumping around. Some ways to raise money awareness. What do you guys do in September?
Yeah, so we have the Out of the Darkness walks, which is our signature fundraisers. So they're all across the country, even Hawaii, and way cooler places than in Indiana. And they start in September, so it starts the week of Suicide Prevention Month. And then ours run through October. There's other states that are much warmer states, like Arizona's don't start until later in the fall, and Florida and things like that too. So, but the walks are a great way for community members to come together. We have a resource fair at all of them. There's usually live music, food trucks, family friendly. When people think like, oh, like that seems like a really like sad day, like everyone just must be crying all the time. But it's really intended to be like a day of hope and remembrance, celebrating the lives of the people that we loved, celebrating the lives of the people that are still with us through their struggles, and celebrating, just how far we've come. We know we've got a really long way to go, but it's just a moment to really highlight and champion hope. And then the funds that we raise from the Out of the Darkness walks, the fall is community walks, and in the springtime is campus walks. We use those funds to offset the cost of those resources and programs that we had just talked about, so that finances aren't a barrier for schools or places of worship or employers to be able to be smart about mental health. We want to be able to pass out crisis text line cards and 988 cards and resources for loss survivors and resources for after an attempt, and prevention and postvention resources without it being how are we going to be able to have this for our students? We didn't have this in the budget or funding, because of our amazing volunteers, because of our amazing sponsors and supporters and champions. The entire time that I volunteered, and then the entire time that I've been a staff member with AFSP, I've never really had to tell anyone no. It's been, how much do you want? How much do you need? And when you need more, email us and we'll get you more. And that's a beautiful testament to Hoosiers and the way that we are helpers. I know some chapters are different, and that's completely fine, but we've had a really healthy support to allow us to make sure that the schools and local libraries and places of worship, community facilities, doctors' offices, they can have all of the resources available. We know, and Skip and I talk about this a lot too, we're not going to connect with the people that need to find us by just being at mental health fairs or only being in doctor's offices. I found out about AFSP at a coffee shop, trying to crank out some work. I know people who found out about it at events like Pride. We've gone to like craft fairs and had tabling events there, like just random places where you're like, that's kind of weird. At, motorcycle events, and at every single one of them, I've been, shoulder to shoulder with Skip. There's someone that's come up and said that they've never heard about us, but they've been impacted. And there's some that have come up and said, hey, I've known about you guys forever. Like we're already signed up for this event. We're signed up for State Capitol Day in the spring, and we're excited to talk to our legislators. We're signed up for a walk, or we're signed up to volunteer at this part of the state. But even to this day, it still hits me hard when you have someone who oftentimes it's a grown adult who never knew about us. And I think about, that easily could be me. That was my grandma, she was in her late 70s before we got connected to resources. And I know, one of my passions is to make sure that the resources are there when someone wants them. They don't have to use them right away. They don't have to use them at all. But just for them to know that they're there either for themselves or someone that they're trying to help support is essential.
Well, I tell you, for our community here in Madison County, here in Indiana, they have just been amazing. AFSP has done so much for us with the funds that we raise and the funds that we didn't have at first to help us, because they try to jumpstart a community to be self-supporting. First they start off and then they work their way in how to join other communities, join together for either walks or events. Speaking of events, on November 19th, what's coming up, Kelsey?
Yeah, so the Saturday before Thanksgiving, so this year it's November 19th, 2020, is International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. So it's a global event. We have sites all across the world, and we'll have 11 across Indiana, which is some of the most states average about 4 or 5. For suicide loss survivors to come together right before the holidays. And so it gives people the opportunity to come together to share, their experiences. Kind of a lot of times it can be newer suicide loss survivors. This will be their first holidays without their loved ones, trying to figure out, how do they navigate these moments where your family members are supposed to be there? So Thanksgiving, winter holidays that we have, like Christmas and Hanukkah. What does that look like? Do people, do you make new traditions? Do you try to do the same things? And so we usually have panelists who are a little bit further along in their grief journey kind of share their experience and help answer questions. There's a film that's produced by AFSP, and then just kind of good networking and community outreach to kind of get people ready for the holidays. It's a really nice day. The times vary throughout the day depending on the site, but if you go to afsp.org/Survivor Day, there's about 300 sites across the world posted, and you can find one. It's free to register. So again, this is another way that our funds that we raised are used locally to help bring resources to the community. So.
Sure. Well, and anybody that's listening, if you want any of this information, you can go to burnoutpodcast.org and we can guide you to AFSP, whatever chapter you're at and whatever state you're in. Go on the website and email her. Or who's that lady you were talking about earlier? Would you mind give her a shout out? Would that be okay?
Lisa Bratton and Tammy Lundy.
Yes.
Yeah, so Lisa Bratton, she founded the Indiana chapter. It was chartered in 2008 or 2007 and then launched in 2008. And from that, we have grown from one walk that had 150 walkers and raised about $5,000 to having about 20 walks annually, raising almost $1 million every year, plus or minus some. So it's pretty incredible work. She started the chapter after she lost her son, Kurt. and we didn't have anything locally really happening at that time. And so it's just a proof and a testament, I think. So often, I know at least for me, I thought once I found out about AFSP or, other mental health organizations, if I truly wanted to help or have impact, I needed to have a degree in mental health, or I needed to go back to school to be a doctor or a nurse or something. And all of those roles in our community are essential and vital into this. But I think the biggest piece of this is that it's everyday people like you and me, Skip, that really can have profound impact. People just want to feel seen and heard, and we all have the ability to connect and to lean in and support one another. And if we have those tools, like the programming that we offer, to be able to do those things, we can continue to hopefully save lives and reduce those numbers. And Lisa's an example of that, of, being able to champion hope from the grassroots, and it's really grown into something remarkable, which is awesome.
Absolutely. Kelsey, I want to, we'll kind of wind it down with the end of the podcast. I want to ask you a couple questions. You got somebody that's sitting in their house right now listening to this podcast, and they don't know which direction to go, and they need help. They think they're worthless or depressed and just don't see a way out. What are you going to tell them?
Your brain is lying to you, because my brain has said that to me before too. And you don't have to be able to tell the entire story, but you've got to tell someone. And if someone asks you if you're struggling, to be honest and don't try to cover it up. And if your brain is telling you that they're better off without you, or that you're a burden, it's not true, and that you'll be more missed than you realize, and that your brain is allowing you to realize at the time, to just hang on for a little bit longer until we can get you the help and support that you deserve.
That's good. And remember, there's a new number now. It's 988. If you ever need help, dial 988, and somebody will be on there to help guide you to treatment, to help. It's confidential. You don't have to give your name if you don't want to, but dial 988 and you can get a hold of somebody. Kelsey, thank you again for being on here. There's one last question I'm going to ask you. And is there some phrase or some quote from somebody that when you're struggling, or that keeps you going, keeps you getting up out of bed? Is there something that you can think of that comes off the top of your head right now?
My grandma Stewart always said, from when we were really little, you can start your day over whenever you want. And so whenever there's these moments where the day didn't start off great, or even in the middle of the day it's not going well, whether it's something that happened or it's something in my head, I really try to use that as a reset rather than waiting for tomorrow to be a new day. I can try and reframe and reset in that moment, or stop what I'm doing to not further trigger whatever's happening. But I hear her sweet little mousy voice telling me to try and restart my day in the moment, rather than waiting for the week to be over, or wishing away moments or chunks of time, which is nice.
That's good. Your grandma's a wise person.
She's all right.
Well, Kelsey, thank you again for being on. If anybody needs to contact Kelsey, please get a hold of us at burnoutpodcast.org, or you can go to afsp.org/Indiana and you get a hold of Kelsey that way. Or go to afsp.org and you can find your local chapter there in your state or where you're at. But that brings us to the end of the podcast. We want to thank again Kelsey and Tammy and Lisa for their heart, what they've done. And we want to thank everybody out there that's been helping the podcast, and also in your community. Just thank you. That brings us to the end. Just remember, everybody, go home, shut your radio off, and get some sleep. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Burnt Out Podcast. Your host for Burnt Out is Skip O. Produced by Sean P. Neal. A Two on the Lobster production. Tune in every week for fresh episodes of Burnt Out. and visit burntout.org for more information.